But anyways, guys, now is the time we're going to bring attorney Ken Good on. We're going to talk with Ken, and we're going to ask him his thoughts on everything. Ken, how are you doing? Can you hear us?
I can. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. So, Ken, we said a little bit about your background and kind of what you do, but if you want to just briefly go over what, number one, you're an attorney, you're out of Texas, but give us a little history of just your life as an attorney and kind of what got you into the whole bail reform situation.
Well, I've been an attorney for over 30 years. I started out representing doctors in hospitals when they got sued, and I was interested in doing appellate law. So, early in my career, I argued a case at the Supreme Court of Texas, and I was on a trial team for medical malpractice cases, and we went to a seminar and had a section on new and important cases from the courts of appeals, and 3 of the 5 cases were ours. And then, I got a bondsman had a bunch of default judgments, and so he asked somebody, who do you hire to fix this problem? And someone would say, well, you need an appellate attorney. And someone referred him to me, and we set aside those judgments for him, and then word of mouth spread, and I started representing bondsmen. I continued my interest in appellate law. I've argued the 2 most important cases in the last decade regarding appellate law at the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court in Texas for criminal matters, and we won both of those. I'm now on the board of director of the State Association for Bondsmen. I'm on their legislative team. I draft proposed bills to send for the legislature to consider. I testify on matters before the legislature related to bail. And just I specialize in bail issues now and travel the state representing bondsmen and different bail bond companies as issues arise.
So you're not a bondsman yourself, so you essentially represent bondsmen. Do you represent them when they're trying to get money back, or how's that work?
Well, Texas has two different systems for regulating bail depending on the size of the county. So in the bail bond board counties, which is the larger counties, I represent bondsmen getting them licensed. I also represent them on bond forfeiture cases. Okay. And then, sometimes they have disputes, and either it's a question that has arisen from the county or a question from a client, and I step in and hope to help to get those resolved.
Okay. So let me ask you, what is your big thing as far as what is happening with bail today? I mean, we talked about in the first 15 minutes of this show, what we're seeing, and we don't know if all of this is tied to bail reform, quote unquote, or whatever the case may be, but
or even like the bail project, or like really, how does the bail project work?
Well, I mean, the bail project and other bail funds or charitable bail funds, I refer to them as a solution looking for a problem, because they were created, or they grew and got such large sums of money overnight based on a false allegation that we were having this protest, large numbers of Americans and citizens were going to be arrested, and that people needed to contribute money so that they could get bailed out. And probably 99% of those cases, criminal charges were never filed and people were released without bail. And so now we have these groups that have large sums of money looking for an issue, and so they've decided, well, we'll just start bonding people out. And they're finding, like the rest of the bonding industry, first-time offenders aren't being put in jail. So now they're getting into the middle of it because they're bonding out dangerous people who are going out and creating other crimes. And so you're seeing stories where people who were out on a bond posted by the bail project either commits another crime or, even worse, kill somebody. And so they're not equipped for any of that, and they're just, like I say, they're a solution looking for a problem.
So let me ask you, I know that, I don't know how common this is, but typically if you commit a misdemeanor crime, for example, and you've never been in trouble before, I've heard like a lot of people get to sign out on their own recognizance, right? Is that often used in court still? Is it?
Well, I think it depends on the state, and I think it depends in Texas. It depends on the county. But yes, I would say in our urban areas, there is no one that is a first-time offender on a misdemeanor that is not going to be released. I mean, in Texas, we would call it a PR bond, a personal recognizance bond, which is a free bond. It may have an amount tied to it, but you're promised, it's just a promise. You're signing a piece of paper saying you'll show up, and no matter what amount it says, it's just a paper promise, a pinky swear. But, I think one of the questions, what you were asking, though, is, whether bail reform is causing, this increase in crime. And I do think it may not be the only cause, but it is a large contributing factor, especially, like in California. You can see it everywhere, but when you go to California and they downgrade certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, and then in the big urban areas they decide, well, we're not going to prosecute those anymore. It's not really that. It's kind of common sense to say career criminals are going to conclude that that's a green light to commit more crime. Great. Hey, if we go steal this and we get charged with this crime, they're not going to prosecute us. They won't even arrest us, or we'll get released before they can even complete the paperwork, and our case will be dismissed. Same thing in New York. New York, they went through a period, and they still have some of it left, where if you got arrested for certain crimes, you were just simply released, no bond. And of course, criminals see that as a green light to go commit more crimes. You got one guy bragging on the steps of the courthouse. He's been arrested 85 times. And he's like, hey, bail reform is great. Yeah, because what our good friends don't realize is when you set up these utopian rules that tie the hand of the judges, because you've got this idea that they're taking advantage of first-time offenders, poor people, the people that are going to take advantage of the system that you just set up is career criminals, organized crime. And now you've tied the judges so they can't do anything against them. And that's what we're seeing as a result of bail reform.
Yeah, and one of the things I find this very interesting, and I think, regardless of politics, regardless of any of that, many people have a distrust in media today than ever before. And the reason I say this is because upon doing research of this, and obviously we've touched on bail reform issues or just, prosecutors that went out and for example, the Waukesha parade incident where Darrell Brooks was let out, 6 weeks before after he ran over his girlfriend or the mother of his child on $1,000 bail. But if you look up media-wise, bail reform, you look this stuff up, it's hard to find things that are against bail reform, or at least that call out bail reform in the terms of letting violent criminals back on the streets. For example, there's an article in Vox. The article reads, bail reform, which could save millions of unconvicted people from jail, explained. And it goes on to say hundreds of thousands of legally innocent people languish in jails on any given day simply because they can't afford bail. And the thing is, it's like the media obviously also has a narrative to the bail reform issue that, for example, we run into this many times, but if you ask Sherry's mother, which is 87 years old, or you ask my mom, which is 73, they typically read a lot of the mainstream media. They read the headlines. They sometimes, watch the nightly news. But the nightly news typically talks about things like this: bail reform, which could save millions of unconvicted innocent people from jail. And this is the narrative that the media has kind of put on this bail reform issue rather than calling out any problems that this may exist. And it's one of the things I said. Obviously, there probably is issues with bail, but you can't really go from one extreme to the other. I mean, do you think the media is playing a big part in, kind of rolling this firestorm on down the road?
Absolutely. Because, when you say, hey, maybe there are some issues with bail, I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, the first argument we heard probably 4 or 5 years ago was, well, we've got to change bail because bail's unconstitutional. Well, now we've had 2 different circuit courts hold that bail is constitutional. So now we're hearing arguments, well, we need to change it anyway because, it's not fair. And that's where I kind of get a little upset, because I'm like, well, we have the most fair criminal justice system in the world. You may think it could be more fair, but we're really talking about tying the hands of judges and preventing them from being able to use their discretion so that career criminals and organized crime can take advantage of them. And we're doing it all from the standpoint of, well, it's just not fair. It's just we don't want we want some type of utopia, and we don't have anything to replace it with. We don't have anything that does it better. I mean, there was a district attorney, and I can't remember where it was, but it came out today saying he was in favor of a lot of the police reforms, but he could not agree to bail reform at this time until there was something that did as good a job as the private industry bail system to take its place. Because everywhere you're looking across the United States, they're replacing their private surety bail, or they're backing away from it and trying to replace it with stuff, and crime is increasing. It's because there is nothing that exists today that does as good a job as the current system that's been in effect for 200 years.
And that's what I was going to ask you is, when this bail project fund comes into play, I guess it doesn't go through the bail's bondsmen. And when they do use these project funds, do they look at like prior criminal history or what the criminal offense that is, at hand now? Do they look at that stuff when determining they're going to let them out or not?
No, there was an interview recently with, I think, the Bail Project, one of its leaders, and he was saying, he doesn't even look at that stuff about what offense they're charged with until after they're released. And that's when he says, that was a quote from the interim executive director, Greg Lewin, Lewin. He says, I look at that once they're out. That's kind of the problem. One of the problems I have with these charitable bail funds is they're not regulated. They don't have any special training. They just have a whole bunch of cash. New York heavily regulates their bail funds because those predate the protests from last summer. They've been around for a while. Texas just enacted some reporting requirements, and people have come unglued, and they're like, well, we're not being treated like bondsmen. I'm like, yeah, let's treat you like bondsmen. Yeah. I think Pennsylvania is looking to just require them to be licensed like a bondsman. But the reality is if they were licensed like bondsmen, they'd all have to go out of business because bondsmen normally cannot solicit people at the jail to post their bond. And that's what bail funds do. Oh, nobody else can get you out. We'll come bond you out. Well, that would be a violation of the law in Texas if they were a bonding company.
So where are these funds actually coming from? I mean, who funds these organizations?
And who's in charge of them?
Yeah.
Well, I think they're not-for-profit companies, so they're autonomous. I don't think they have to disclose who contributes money to them. Kamala Harris, during the protest last summer, sent out a tweet, and that's where one of the funds, got $20 million is people contributing to it because her tweet was saying go contribute to them. And so now they have a whole bunch of money. And then, like the Bail Project, you mentioned the guy from the parade. The Bail Project tried to raise money from GoFundMe to post a $6 million bond for him until GoFundMe shut it down. So they were on their way to trying to raise $6 million to get him out of jail. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll find a way. If I had to guess, and the thing is, it seems like when COVID came around, the pandemic and all this stuff, it almost started to be like an excuse to be, to start letting people out. And I know that doesn't specifically have anything to do with the bail funds, I don't guess, but at the same time, it kind of changed the narrative. It seemed like that was when prosecutors started, either not prosecuting based on certain things. I don't know if you probably didn't hear the first 15 minutes of the podcast, but like, for example, there was a Chicago shooting a month ago that 70 shell casings were fired. There was one person dead in the street, and yet the prosecutor decided not to charge based on mutual combat, which is supposed to be only a rule in fighting, and it's really an old law. But, what I did want to ask is how much does the prosecutor, obviously, a prosecutor can choose not to charge someone or to charge someone, but how much does the prosecutor have to do with how much the bail is? Because I thought the judge did that, but does the prosecutor have anything to do with that?
Well, I think in most places the prosecutor makes a recommendation of what the bond is. Like in Texas right now, the standard is when a bond is set, if the defendant wants to allege it was too high, the Court of Appeals will review that on abuse of discretion standard. So I think that bail is set with the they go to court. The judge looks to the state to make a recommendation on bail, and then the defense will respond, and then the judge will decide ultimately what he's going to require the bond to be. So I think that's one of the things. But I think the pandemic does have some effect or some contributing cause of increasing crime, because I like to say the pandemic has given us a preview on steroids of what these proposed bail reforms that we've been talking about for years would look like if they all just passed suddenly.
Yeah.
We had temporary measures, and we see. But I think the other thing that contributed is we stopped trying criminal cases, and so you got criminals that are being arrested, let go, arrested, let go, arrested, let go, and they're just seeing that as, well, I'm ultimately going to go to jail, so let's have fun now. Or they, even worse, we're creating a situation where we're making it worse for criminals, because they think that there's no consequences. They get arrested, they're released, they do something else, they get arrested, they get released. So they think that they're not going to be held accountable. And in those situations, the poor guys, when they ultimately are held accountable, they're going to end up probably serving a lot more time than if we'd have just charged them, tried their case, got the resolution, got the victim to have finality. But we've gone a year without trying cases, and so now we have a huge backlog, and I think that's causing problems, because you've got judges trying to help counties, because the county jails are still full. That's kind of the lesson that no one wants to talk about, is the jails are still full, but they're full of really, really dangerous people. And if we start putting all these people who are missing court in jail, then that's going to make them have to start shipping people to other jails, and it's going to cost the county a bunch of money. And so they're trying to help the county, but we've got a powder keg that's just starting to erupt all over the country.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like to me, and it's one of those things. Obviously, on this podcast, we do talk about politics. And one of the things, we talk about is just the state of politics and how it is affecting everything that we're seeing. And this includes bail reform, and this includes all of that. But I did have a question, and I think this is an important question. I've actually listened to a couple of your other interviews before you came on, because I wanted to kind of see what people either haven't asked or whatever the case is. But every time I go on I guess like a bail reform website, or say a bail reform article, CNN or whoever it may be, one of the things I constantly see is how race is put into this. Now, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this, but we have, listeners from us, we have supporters all around the world, and we have many black supporters. We have many black supporters that reach out to us, even on the Waukesha incident, or just certain things like that, agree with kind of our stance on, like, it's, and I think they would do the same with this. It seems like a lot of the articles, when it comes to bail reform, if I was a poor white guy, I guess you can say, would the bail reform groups or organizations come to my aid as a poor white guy, or is this predominantly geared towards, everything I've read, a lot of articles I read, this is saying, it's unfair to black people, or it's unfair to this, whatever. And I know that's probably a big political question, and it's probably I don't know how they would even got the bail reform money to begin with if it wasn't for politics.
So I guess what you're asking is everyone vetted on the same information? Yeah.
Is everyone vetted across the board the same way?
Oh, that's a really, really good question, because I think that I think the answer to that is going to be different depending on your politics.
Yeah.
And because I think that, we keep hearing this same argument that we have an over-incarceration problem of minorities, and that is a symptom or a sign that we have a racism problem in our criminal justice system. And I strongly disagree with that. And I disagree with it because I think the whole problem with the bail reform movement is it's not addressing the heart of the issue. And the heart of the issue is, how do we process large numbers of people through our urban jails quickly and efficiently? And our urban jails, or our urban areas, are predominantly made up of one race or a couple of minorities, because everyone else that can get away from the urban areas or the inner cities have moved. And so schools have failed them, families have failed, the drug abuse is rampant, and then we have loss of economic opportunity, which I think that the protests from the summer made that even worse, because businesses that were destroyed are not coming back because they don't feel like they're going to be protected by the politicians. And I think if you overlay on top of that, I would argue that, there's one political party that tries to whip up its supporters right 6 months before every election.
Yeah.
And they've done that for many factors. And I think we are now going to see this coming election, probably the first one in probably at least 5 cycles, where either that did not happen, or if it does, it will not have the same effect. Because I think the bail reform movement is a symptom of what they've been doing. Is they've whipped up their supporters to make them angry, to make them come out and vote in larger numbers, but they do it by making empty promises. And then they get mad because they don't fulfill their promises. So now more recently, we see the more extreme elements of the party getting elected to office because they not only make the crazy promise, they follow through. And so now you see divisions in the national in Congress between the left and the far left. Because I would say even Pelosi didn't used to be the middle or the moderate. She used to be the far left. She's not the far left anymore.
Yeah, she's the middle.
And so you're now seeing the results of that. Once you create a mob and you can't control a mob very long, and so they're losing control of the anger that they have created. And I think one of the unspoken things that we can't talk about really is how close that party is to having a civil war.
Yeah.
But I think that's causing a lot of the push for bail reform. And the problem we have in our urban areas is we just don't have anything to replace it with. And that's the reason why we're having chaos, because they can't afford just at the very beginning of someone's arrest to spend all this money when they have to go through trials and they have to have all those expenses. And so that's why you're seeing they just we're just going to release people. If you're charged with this, we're just going to release you. Well, the problem is career criminals see that and go, well, shoot, if I do this 10 times, I get arrested 10 times, they still have to release me. And that's what you're seeing happen. And that's why the public is getting so upset about it, because they should. I mean, someone should have a smash and grab. You shouldn't be worried that someone's going to come in, 80 people, and smash and grab everything in your store and run. And then if 14 of them gets arrested, they all get released on zero bail because of bail reform. I mean, they're not going to be tried. I mean, that's not our community. We can't have that's not public safety, and we can't have a country if we're going to be run by that. That really is that you get to the point where you're saying, well, who's running that town? Is it organized crime, or is it law enforcement? And it looks like to me that looks like organized crime is starting to get in control of that area.
Yeah, I think so many people have just lost faith in government. They've lost faith in and here's the reality. It's strange because, it's, for example, the political lines on things, whether it be Democrat or Republican. Republican has always typically been pro-government, pro-law enforcement. I think many still are, but it's just kind of the way the government is working now rather than for the people. It seems like against the people in many ways. Now you have two sides that are kind of just, this side's always against the government. They've always kind of, been against the government or, always call out government on certain things. And now you have another side that's losing all faith in government and the things that kind of entail that. But it's a scary situation. Is there anything good about the bail reform issue? I mean, is there a need for it? And is there a middle ground there? Is there something do we even need this? Is bail good the way it is?
Well, I think any system can always be improved. And I think probably I would look to, Texas just passed a major bail reform bill in its last legislative session, and it's different than what's passed anywhere else. It's based upon accountability, and, it has a section of crimes that if you're a career criminal or if you're accused of certain violent crimes, you're not eligible for PR bonds. And so I think that that's a step in the right direction. We see other things that are being pushed that I think are just crazy. I mean, risk assessments have been pushed for 4 or 5 years, and they've kind of gone full circle. They were the darling of the left. Then science came out and said they shouldn't be using them. Digital companies came out saying they shouldn't be used. And now the right is trying to make them the darling of the right when they've really been rejected by everybody by now. So I think that the majority of the claims for bail reform are just politics. I think that most of the places that bail reform is not needed because they're replacing it with a system that's worse than the one that they're using, and they don't even know it. And so if that is what they're proposing, then no, you don't need any changes, because anything that's we should always say first thing we should do is do no harm. But if the reforms they're asking and demanding that we do is just going to make crime go up, and then we don't need to be doing it. But I think there are always things that we can do. But my concern right now is we're being reactive. You've got the Soros group out electing DAs that are saying we're not going to prosecute certain crimes, and that's a part of the cause of increased crime. And then you've got now he's branching out to judges to elect judges that will either give less sentences or continue down that path. And I think then you're going to need bail reform, because then you're going to have to cut back on the judge's discretion to be able to do some of that. Because right now, part of me wants to say, hey, we're just going back to the 60s. We had a similar problem then where the left kind of pushed, our friends on the one side started pushing these types of issues. But I think it's worse this time around. You can see it in Houston, Texas, where they've put in place some of these reforms. Crime skyrocketed, but the people who put them in place admit crime's increasing, but they won't admit what they're doing is the cause of it. And so I think we're a little bit more political, a little bit more, people are a little bit more entrenched. I like to just kind of mention that, a democracy is really the result of the losing side agreeing to be governed by the winning side. Mm-hmm. And we have a problem with that right now. Both the right and the left don't agree they lost the last two elections.
Yeah.
So whichever side lost, the other side stole it. And so if the losing side won't consent to be governed by the winning side, then that's what causes a lot of problems. And you can see that with our current president trying to undo everything the last president did, and the last president trying to undo everything the president before him did. And if we're going to do that, then until we get that resolved, the first year of any presidency is always going to be to undo everything the last president did. And that's not really, we've not had that before really. Until just now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, how do you call that democracy? Because it's almost like a dictatorship while they're in. But you know what I mean? It's the same authoritarian.
Well, no, I agree with that. We've got these competing executive orders where we've got presidents that said that they would never do it when they were campaigning. Obama saying on certain executive orders, I don't have the authority to do it. But then when they get in office, they can't convince the other side to agree with them. So then they just start doing it by executive order. And I really think, what happened to the time, which was not that long ago, where we had presidents that say, hey, I couldn't convince them. I don't have the authority to do it by executive order. I think a lot of our current presidents lost in the polls is because he's trying to shove things down the public's throat that he can't convince the other side to let him do by executive order, and stuff he has no authority to do, and he doesn't even care. It looks like because he keeps losing in the courts.
Yeah, and I got to bring this up because there's a couple things. How much do you think does the bail reform thing have anything to do with Chicago? Looking at Chicago and, the just insane amount of shootings, Is that more of a prosecutorial thing, or is that does bail reform also play into Chicago gang members getting out?
I don't believe bail reform has anything to do with Chicago, because I don't think they have bail in Chicago. I think that, when they call it bail, it's kind of like the parade incident. They call that bail, but they don't have private surety bail in Wisconsin or Chicago. All they have is cash bail. So if they set a bond for $1,000, then it has to post $1,000. We don't do business there.
Yeah.
And so I think the problem you have in Chicago, especially Chicago, is I think you just have an organized crime problem, and you have career criminals, organized crime, gangs running the town. I don't know how you can get a weekend where 30 people aren't shot and people just don't come unglued, and it's just a way of life there, because I think gangs run the town.
Yeah, it's like a Wild West town nowadays. And you mentioned George Soros, and we've talked quite often about George Soros on this podcast, and a lot of people, it's funny because a lot of people say a year ago, if we talked about George Soros getting involved in American politics or getting involved in American justice system, whatever the case may be, it was
a conspiracy.
Yeah, it was absolutely a conspiracy theory. I'm not saying it isn't a conspiracy,
but
it was a theory, a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever the case may be. But, I know you also mentioned, the fact that, especially like this administration, they will play into or whatever, into events or things, they'll blow up something to, whether it be to get people out to vote, whether it be to pander to a certain audience, whatever the case may be. But what do you think George Soros is doing this for, as far as, getting people elected in our country? And keeping in mind, if you know anything about George Soros and his involvement in other countries and overthrowing governments in other countries, his direct involvement in that over the many years he's been billionaire, and then you'd also mention a civil war. I mean, what is his, do you believe, purpose in that? I know it's a little not necessarily to do with bail reform, but what do you think his pitch on that is? What do you think
his intention?
Motive? Yeah.
Well, I do agree with you. 2 years ago, if you just mentioned the word George Soros outside of Republican areas, you'd be scoffed at. You're just crazy. But now you see, mainstream stories about it, and it's not a conspiracy theory anymore. It's a fact that his political funds are contributing large amounts of monies to candidates running to be district attorney. I talked to one of them one time, and they were like, well, they wanted me to sign a document saying that I would agree to do these certain things, and I ultimately refused, and then they came back to me they weren't going to make me sign it. And so I think initially they were having candidates sign, or trying to get the candidates to sign documents saying that they were going to adhere to certain principles, which I think would be a big problem. And I think that's the reason why we haven't heard more about that. But I think his goal, there's a coalition on that side, and part of that coalition just wants to create chaos. And part of that coalition are true believers. Mm-hmm. They think that, poor people should not be prosecuted because they're poor. And I just disagree with that. I think that should go to guilt, but that only should go the first time, and not the fourth time, not the fifth time, not the seventh, eighth, or ninth time. Like in Harris County, where they're keeping track of 150 people who've been murdered by someone who was out on bond at the time they were murdered, and most of them out on 4 or 5 bonds, some of them out on 7 or 8 bonds, and some out on 10 or 12 bonds at the time they murdered them.
Yeah, and I think that is a big problem.
Out on capital murder, murdering somebody else, out on bond, and then murder again.
Yeah, I think
so. Where he falls, does he fall on the creating chaos end of the team, or is he a true believer? It's just my opinion, but I believe he wants to create chaos.
I completely agree with you, because there are so many people that, they'll have 4 or 5 really good charges on them. I have a lot of friends that are police officer or law enforcement, and they have, really good cases, and either their charges get dismissed by another charge, or if they had charges like murder, burglary.
Yeah.
Or like anything like that, they'll get a plea bargain for the lesser charge, and it's not even on the record. And then when they go and commit another act of crime, the
most violent thing is not on the record.
It's not on the record.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the point of do we have an over incarceration problem, or right now do we have an under incarceration problem? Like in California, they haven't been building jails for so long, and they're under a court order to release people. And I mean, they're not looking for people who've been rehabilitated; they're just releasing numbers of people. And all these things contribute a little bit. So when you change the law to change certain felonies down to misdemeanors, and then you say we're not going to prosecute those anymore in certain towns, that's going to increase crime. You've got just criminals being released, and you've got prosecutors who are saying, well, we don't have room for them because of the pandemic, so we've got to make special deals. We got to give them really great punishment, so we're discounting crime right now. And it just all is kind of coming to a head right now after a year of the pandemic. And I think that it's just going to get worse before it gets better, because you're going to have to hold more people in jail, hold them accountable, and before it's going to get better. And I've told judges in my area that, if you don't care whether people show up for court, well, then you don't need us. That's what we do. The bonding community gets people to court. That's what we guarantee. And that's what we have the best appearance rate of anything that's tried. If you want half of your people not to come, then try something else. But if you don't really care that people come to court, then you don't need us. And if you don't need us, then you're going to get more backlogs. That means your cases aren't going to get resolved as quickly. The victims aren't going to get resolution. And, of course, you're going to have chaos. And isn't that what we're seeing in the urban areas where they've tried bail reform?
I hate to say it again as far as conspiracy theory goes, but it's you look back and you see administrations or whatever using certain things for political purposes, especially near elections, but it just seems like there's been a lot of stuff that has played into exactly what is happening right now, from the bail reform, from prosecutors being put in place that are not prosecuting, to judges that are dismissing things or whatever. We saw that under Trump. We see it now under Biden, especially with the mandate stuff. But more so, it's been on the left side of things that have had judges or prosecutors in place to either release or rule on something that went against one other party or whatever the case may be. But we started seeing this not just with not as much under Trump or Biden, but we started seeing this in Obama's term. The first 4 years,
yeah.
He started putting in judges in place. He started getting, he kind of went on a campaign more so for the judges and prosecutors and so on and so forth. And he tried to get as many of those in as he could. And looking back now, it's affected a lot of stuff. It seems like if you had let's just say if you had a deep state or some group that had some plan about whatever they wanted to do over a, say, 10-year period. Here's your 10-year goal, and we're going to start with these things. We're going to get these people elected, because then eventually we're going to have this, and then we're going to have bail reform. We're going to have prosecutors in. They're not going to charge people. Doesn't it seem like it's been a kind of a longer thought-out plan, more so than just the past, say, even year?
No, I'm less conspiracy theorist on this issue, on the bigger issue. I go back to cycles. It's all cyclical, and you have to start with, it's not a coalition of everybody wanting chaos. You've got some true believers, and you've got some people who think we can just make the system better. So it's a coalition of different minded groups, and I think it's a cycle. We went through a period where crime was going down. We felt really safe. New York was very successful. And then, so people started saying, well, we've got too many people in jail. Okay, well, that makes sense. I feel really safe. And then we've got, well, we need to have fewer people in jail. We need to get in this practice. We need to end this practice. And that'll make us better. We'll be more racially diverse. And so as things start getting chipped away, about law and order gets chipped away, well, crime is slowly increasing. it's not like this has just suddenly popped up. I mean, I was listening to a police officer in California talking, and said crime has been going up for the last couple of years in California as they made that change from certain felonies being changed to misdemeanors, and then certain urban areas no longer prosecute them. And so I think it's just now reached the point where it's the suburbs, as I like to call it, is recognizing it, and they're no longer willing to accept it, which is exactly what happened in the 60s as well. I think maybe there's some elements of it as we get more technologically advanced on coordination and stuff like that, that makes it seem a lot more worse. But my prayer and my hope is that this is just another cycle that's coming crashing down. You see Democrats across the United States now saying, like mayors especially, that law and order is their top issue. So they're abandoning their issue, or they're trying to give window dressing or lip service to the law and order so that they can get reelected. It's just going to get worse for them before it gets better as well. I think law and order is going to be the top issue of this election, and just like it was at the end of the last cycle in the 60s. So I'm hopeful that this is just a normal cycle, and I'm hoping that it's not anything more than that.
Yeah, it's just scary. I think politics are at the root of all evil in this country, it seems. And I with all of this, I don't know that any of this, and regardless of politics, I don't know that any of the things that we're seeing right now would at all be happening if it wasn't for politics. I mean, I think there's right and there's wrong, I mean, and it seems like today what used to be right is in the media now wrong, and vice versa. And I think that's a big issue.
I think one of the things, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think one of the things that's kind of upset me a lot in the last year is this appearance of a double standard. Mm-hmm. You see the protesters from a year ago being treated one way, and then protesters at January 6th, who seem to be from a different party or supporting a different party, being treated a different way. Well, you can see that same thing on a smaller scale from county to county. Yeah. In Texas right now, we have certain counties that no longer will prosecute marijuana charges or unless it's over a certain size, and then the very next county still prosecutes them and still will send you to jail for them. And so all of that undermines the public's faith in the criminal justice system. I mean, I don't know how we fix that. I mean, you've seen that now even more on the national scale. You can see the debate on the case at the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of abortion and whether they're going to reverse Roe versus Wade. And you can see people coming out and say, if they reverse it, it's just political. So we're at a point where if you don't agree with one side, then you're no longer a valid institution. Yeah. And so that's dangerous in my book. I mean, that's dangerous. To me, that's one of the really dangerous things that we're facing. And I think we just have to put our head down and just vote a bunch of people out of office.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary, man. You want to have faith in the country, and then you see GoFundMes for murderers, that are raising millions of dollars. And
I think a lot of the problem with those funds and the GoFundMe is, I think a lot of the problem is when these people are going to jail, they're not being reformed. Like they want to, they're not reforming anybody.
Well, there's no reform,
don't care.
Yeah.
Like there's no rehabilitation. There's no, I don't think. Like they just let them out.
That's the biggest. That is one of my criticisms of all these, changing sentencing and all that. Let's look at everybody's in jail and just release 1,000 of them. I mean, if we could come up with a system that we're looking for people in jail who've actually been reformed, like they went and got their GED or they went through some type of training for a skill, and we could. But the problem is that goes back to the whole concept of government. Government can't do any job well. And so they sure can't go through the jail and say, okay, you've been reformed. We think you've been reformed, so we're going to give you early release. Because if they did it, they're just going to be accused of racism. And so they just do across the board. And that's what I think is causing some of this increase in crime. They're just releasing criminals across the board. And some of them are just like, yay, yippee, it's a green light. We're going to the party. was commit more crime.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ken, is there a way that, I mean, what is the answer and what is the solution? And is there a way that anybody can do anything to better this? Like, I know that you're a proponent of fixing this, but what is your thoughts and plans or ideas?
Or even the board.
Yeah, the board or
the
whatever.
board of reform, or
yeah, what is
what's on the table?
Yeah, what's the future?
Well, I think I think the bill that Texas just enacted is a good roadmap. It's based on accountability. And so I think we have to have accountability. If you don't show up for court, then there's a penalty for that. You don't get, if they forfeit your bond, you don't get a new PR bond. So I think we have to hold people accountable. And if it's just hold them accountable for not showing up for court. And then I think we have to get cases resolved more quickly. I think part of the reason why that we're having people languish and going through cycles is because their cases are not being resolved in any type of method or quickly. But I think the biggest problem is our urban areas. How do we process large numbers of people through the jail quickly and efficiently? Historically, our urban areas have used a bail schedule. They're being pressured not to use those currently because that heavily relies upon the private industry if you can afford the bail schedule. But they're replacing it with simple release, which has been catastrophic. Even in New York, during the middle of the pandemic, they repealed part of their reform that allowed that. There's still parts that need to be repealed. And so I think that we have to get rid of these bad bail reforms that made current situations worse. And I think we need to do a top-down evaluation of what constitutes certain crimes, and we can agree to get rid of certain crimes, but this piecemeal thing where one county we prosecute, another county we don't. I mean, I agree with you. This prosecutors having too much discretion is really killing the faith in our legal industry. And then the biggest problem is, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the biggest problem right now is we've got a runaway drug problem, and we've given up on fighting drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Initially, we said, we're not going to put them in jail anymore. We're going to give them drug rehab. We're not doing that. We're just saying that. It's just pure lip service. We have completely given up on the fight on drugs. And so many other crimes are a result of the drug problem we have in this country. Yeah. And until we decide what we're going to do, what do we stand for, and if the drug rehab is not working, then what are we going to do with these people? We can't just let them run free. And currently, I think that's what we're doing, because we've this mindset that we've lost the war on drugs is kind of pretty well entrenched right now. And I think that's a severe danger. If you give up on the drug crime, then you're giving up to chaos, because that's the cause of probably 80-90% of all of our crime in the United States. People doing other crimes to get money so that they can get drugs.
And we've talked about this on previous podcasts. Not that I agree or kind of agree, but a lot of what we're talking about, like, okay, so certain states have legalized marijuana. Has that like you were talking about, county to county, or the solicitors are different.
Well, there's a lot of people that want to legalize drugs, period.
Yeah. But what if we legalized all drugs? Then it's going through, the legal channels or whatever, and there's not drug dealers and people stealing for this and that. And
well, I think they might still be. And actually, he makes kind of a good point, because there is this big talk about legalizing all drugs to stop the fentanyl crisis, right? Mm-hmm. Or the people that are dying of fentanyl, and we've been seeing that more and more every day.
And I'm sure you guys see it a lot in Texas with being close to the border
and everything else, and all the fentanyl there. But yeah, I mean, but at the same time, you kind of make a good point too. A lot of crime is committed based on drug use, or I mean, you see this every day.
I'm just wondering if we could
let me just carry your argument through on that one, because doesn't that argument suffer the same problem as a lot of the other arguments that are approaches that we've tried? Doesn't that give a free rein to organized crime? I mean, okay, we've now legalized fentanyl. I mean, I think people think, well, okay, now we're going to take that away from organized crime. I think you've given them a green light, a free hand now, and you've tied the hands of law enforcement. They can't stop it because it's now legal.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely and that's the thing.
But do you feel like that would be the same thing with like marijuana? Like, some states marijuana is legal, some are not. Like, but now every state, people don't care if they smoke marijuana because it's legal in some states. So they're like, "Why are you busting me? It's legal in this state." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was talking to somebody from Colorado recently, and they were saying that
That's where I'm from.
The effects of marijuana making it legal in Colorado have been pretty devastating. So I think the jury is still out on that one. I think that we're going to see that, and that may go full circle. It may not. I just don't know. I have an opinion on that, but I really have no experience with it to really express a strong opinion. Yeah. I just think that it's a terrible. It's doing damage to our community by having one rule in one county, another rule in another, and even one rule in one state, another rule in another state.
Yeah, everything
we need to figure out what the answer to that is and do it.
It needs to be unified one way or another.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's a scary thing that it's a scary place that we're living in 2021, and I think that bail reform and this whole bail issue, and not just bail, but the prosecution and people that are in place, it is literally our future. I mean, if regardless of how we look at it.
Look, I think, when we call it bail reform, we're the low-hanging fruit. Nobody likes bondsmen, so it makes it really easy to say, oh, we just need to reform bail reform or get rid of bondsmen. But, we're really talking about criminal justice reform. Yeah. And it's a bigger issue than just bondsmen, because you've got prosecutors who are deciding whether to prosecute crimes. If you don't think someone should be prosecuted, well, then you don't care whether they show up for court, because you don't think that they should be there in the first place. Yeah. The bigger debate is what is a crime. And you've got prosecutors in this country right now that think misdemeanors should not, are not real crimes. They should be prosecuted. And I think you're seeing evidence everywhere in the country that misdemeanors matter, because people who are getting a green light on non-prosecution they're not going to have bail. They're seeing that as, hey, we can keep doing this. And, if too many people get that green light, there's no room, and we can't build enough jails to hold those people. So we better get a handle on this pretty quickly.
Yeah, because, you're going to start seeing more people enter the system that wouldn't probably have normally entered it.
That's right.
Given
and Ken,
stricter rules.
Do you feel like I was talking to a police officer today, and he feels like a lot of the crime, it does come from drug use. Like everything,
that's what he was saying,
is a step up from drug use.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I think everything. I think a lot of crime is from drug use, because it's they're robbing a car so they can get money for drugs, or these smash and grabs. They're recruiting 80 people to go in and grab whatever they can, and then they meet up and give them $10, $20 for whatever they got, and that they're either buying alcohol or drugs with that.
Yeah. Whew, man, there's so much wrong, but hopefully, I say hopefully, we have something that comes to a head, and there's just so much. There's literally so much that is just complete opposites of the other. That half the country thinks this, and half the country thinks this. And one side is devout on this, and one side is devout on the other. And it's like, what is going to be the outcome? And what's going to be the solution? And we don't know. But I think the bail issue and the prosecution issue and the criminal justice reform issue is. I'm not saying that necessarily our justice system is perfect, and I'm sure there's ways you can fix it, along with certain things in law enforcement. But what we're seeing is going to the extremes on everything. And
it's scary.
Well, I think we've got a lot to do, but it's bigger issues than that in our urban areas. Where how do you fix the schools? We've been trying to fix the schools for 50 years. How do you fix families? How do you encourage families to stay together? Mm-hmm. How do you fix your inner city drug problems? How do you keep people in school? How do you keep people from dropping out? How do you get them a trade? How do you give them economic opportunity? Yeah. And if you could just fix one of those. And one of the things we hadn't even talked about is the number of of people in jail who have mental health issues. Yeah. In Texas, the largest mental health facilities in the state are in the county jails. That's outrageous.
It is.
And if you got rid of those people or took them and put them in a mental health facility, you wouldn't have jail overcrowding in Texas. But we don't. That's where we put them, and that's part of the problem. You get them in, You get them their drugs, they're
Mm-hmm.
stable, they get released, they get off their drugs,
Yep.
they start having problems. It's a cycle. It's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, yeah, you
How
got
do
to
you
go,
fix
you got to
it?
go to the root problems of those things, which
Yeah,
is,
you're right.
actually having mental health facilities.
And going to the schools, the families, like you said, everything, having facilities, everything like that.
Yeah, instead of taking them to jail, take them to a mental health facility or whatever the case is. But I don't know why we don't do that. Just for example,
the problem is, that's a simple issue too. How do you make them go? I mean, they have to agree to go. If they're
Right.
not, otherwise they have to go to jail to go to court, so the court can order them to go. It's the same with drugs. I mean, people, we just need them to go to rehab. Well, how do you get a drug addict to go to rehab if they don't want to go? You arrest them, you put them in jail. They can decide to go to rehab or go to jail. Without the hammer of going to jail, they're never going to reach out for the carrot. And for these people on the other side who are, some of them are in good faith, to say, we don't need to send police officers to conflicts. We need to send CPS workers. I mean, we're going to get suits against counties for all the CPS workers that are killed because they didn't come prepared for a gunfight. And those are ridiculous arguments. Who's going to triage those calls? The police do that.
yeah.
And those are the most difficult calls to go on.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Sherry had a friend that she grew up with that she has tried to help over the years, that has had this, over the past at least 5 years, that has had a pretty big issue, first with alcohol and then heavily with drugs. And especially the past 6 months or 8 months or whatever, she would call Sherry and she would be homeless or on the streets or whatever, do whatever we can. She's been to rehab 3 times. But the thing is, when we started figuring out, and she lives in 4 states away from us, when we started actually trying to get help for her, as far as like actual help in either that county, a county next to her, a county next to that, it was almost impossible.
She doesn't want the help.
Well, but even if she did, finding the help was almost impossible.
Oh, it was impossible. Like I searched all day.
This is an issue that's very close to my heart. I have a sister who had a car accident in 1989. Broke every bone in her face, and she started a 30-year prescription drug addiction and then other things as well.
Yeah.
And, how many times, attempted suicide, drug rehab, family intervention.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get her straightened out, if she was ever straightened out, until I had her declared incompetent, and I was appointed her guardian. And then the last 5 years of her life, she lived in an assisted living facility where they managed her medication. And she she died suddenly, but she was happy. She had a brain injury as well. But she was very well loved by the other people that lived there. She was a lot younger than them because, she had that car accident so early. But I'm telling you, our experience, my family's experiences with prescription drug abuse and other drug abuse,
it
to
changes.
a lot of families, jails are the poor man's drug rehab. You
Yes.
take that away and say you can't hold somebody in jail just because they say they can't afford it. Well, then how is the poor people? Doesn't that hurt poor people more?
Exactly, because I told my best friend, I was like, the only thing really that's going to save you is if you get arrested and go to jail for something
to
get you cleaned out.
And if you're saying, well, we can't hold anybody because they can't afford it, then you're making it even worse for poor families like we were when this happened. I was like,
you can't just go to any rehab without insurance and being homeless. It's really hard to find.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing
That's
is,
right.
it's weird that jail sometimes or whatever might be the only opportunity
the
that
solution,
they're sober enough,
yeah,
long enough to have an opportunity to maybe change.
I don't know.
But you're right in the same sense that jail is not a rehab center, and it's unfortunately jail. I thought that, the whole concept was supposed to be you're supposed to basically reform yourself and all that, but that's just not what happens. If anything, sometimes when people come out of jail, they're worse, and and it's because of, I don't know. But at the same time,
we're trying to make our criminal justice system stuff that it was never intended to be. We're not going to give services to people, or we should not be trying to give services to people when they're arrested to find out what the problem is, why they've committed a crime, or they're charged with a crime. they're supposed to set a bond high enough to ensure they appear. They appear, we get their case, we either get it, they plead guilty or it's dismissed, or they go to trial and they get found guilty, and then the victim gets resolution, and then we go to the next case. Now we see all across the country where they're trying to make our criminal justice system the social services system, where we find out why did somebody commit this crime, what services do they need to fix them. That's not the purpose of the criminal justice system. And the times when they got all those opportunities, the system has failed them every chance they have. And so the defendant's last opportunity to become a productive citizen, we're throwing that chance away because we're saying that we can't do that in the criminal justice system, and we're just failing people one more time. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy. I hope that there is a good future for our country, and whatever that is, I don't know, but there are a lot of issues, and I think the bail issue and the prosecutorial issue is definitely one. Ken, now is there what are you doing now, and what is or what are you primarily focused on now in your career?
Well, I'm still I specialize in bail law. I write a lot of articles on bail reform. We just had a major bill passed in Texas. So I'm, people who want more information on the issues that we see as bail reform and what's not working across the country, they can go to pbtx.com and they can look at our blog. We have an elected officials corner on our menu. We just started a podcast of our own. We just did an episode on what the heck do bondsmen do, so people can see all the work that bondsmen do to get people to court.
And what is your podcast on the website?
Yes.
Okay, so the website was pbtx.com, right?
Yes, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, so
okay.
pbtx.com, and all the information that we've talked about is on the blog.
And what's the name of your podcast?
It's just
the
PBTX,
Bell Post.
Bell
okay.
Post. Okay, cool.
Okay.
The Bell Post.
Cool.
Now, are you guys on Spotify and all that stuff? Can people find you on there yet?
Yes, they can. We've been there for probably less than 2 weeks.
Okay, cool.
We just did our first podcast 2 weeks ago.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you want to listen to him, go check him out. Ken, look, it was
and
very good.
And we will
talking
put his
to you.
information on the Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, we'll put your
all
information
your
on our
links.
website and all that stuff. Facebook
Okay,
and
good.
Facebook and Instagram don't love us very much, so they don't. I don't know if
Twitter.
anybody's going to see your stuff on there.
Yeah, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Yeah, we're on all those things too.
But we will definitely put you on our website, and
you guys can just look them up too.
Yeah, we're actually
It's
launching our
Ken
own
Good.
social media here shortly, so we'll put you on there. But Ken, thank you so much for spending your evening with us and talking about this. I think it's a major issue, and I think there needs to be people like you guys talking about this, because if it isn't for you, and if it isn't for people like you,
Nothing's going to get done.
Nothing's ever going to change,
Yeah.
and no one's ever going to know about it. And I think that's when we saw this opportunity to talk to you. And with the amount of listeners we have, and we've grown for 3 years, we wanted to do something that maybe could help. And just the fact that people can hear this, may help, and it may do something to change, the outcome of our future and what's going on right now. So we do definitely appreciate you.
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate it. We really see ourselves as a resource and a spot to get educated on the issues. I know probably not that long ago people say, "Oh, don't listen to them; they're bondsmen." But we have people across the country coming, asking us for information and listening to what or reading all the different articles we've read and the stuff that you've mentioned. So we've really worked hard to be a resource and to try to make the system better, or at least not make it any more worse than it already is.
Yeah,
but thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. And good luck to you. And we might bring you back when there's some other craziness, because don't worry, there will be more craziness.
There absolutely will. We'll love to.
All right.
So we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Ken.
All right. Thanks, Ken.